On September 30th, we celebrate my favorite saint, Saint Jerome. Saint Jerome was born in the year 345 and called to God in the year 420. He's my favorite saint because I figure if Jerome made it, well, there's hope for the rest of us. Jerome was brilliant. He was from a wealthy family. He was sort of had inflected with intellectual pride, as was Augustine. But worse than Augustine, he had a terrible temper. I mean, he could not abide any kind of one who disagreed with him. If someone did, he could really put somebody down by his sarcasm. He had a terrifically sarcastic tongue, and he would really make someone feel terrible if they happened to disagree with him. I've already mentioned in a previous program that he had a running battle with St. Augustine, mostly over the interpretation of Scripture. But the thing is, he was so brilliant. He was a classical Ciceronian Latin scholar. And Ciceronian Latin, if those of you know, is the very best. It's the upper crust Latin. It's not the common Latin. He knew Greek perfectly. So Pope Damasus called on him to be his secretary. I don't think that Damasus could probably abide a lot of the antics of Jerome, but Jerome was Damasus' secretary until Damasus died 3 years later, and Jerome more or less had to get out of town because of all those that he had offended. I'm trying to find a quotation that, a couple of quotations that he had. For example, he wrote about the women of Rome who paint their cheeks with rouge and whose plastered faces, too white to be human, look like idols, who enamel a lost youth with the wrinkles of age and affect a maidenly timidity in the midst of a troop of grandchildren. You know, that's kind of pretty sarcastic. He wrote about some priests that he didn't like. He says, the only thing they worry about is clothes. You'd think they were bridegrooms rather than clerics. And about an adversary, one who had disagreed with him, he said, if he would conceal his nose and keep his mouth shut, he might be taken for both handsome and learned. Well, the letters of Jerome are very famous for a lot of sarcasm. Well, he didn't become a saint because of his sarcasm or because of his bad temper or because of his brilliance. He became a saint because eventually he started doing what Christ wanted. Damasus sent him to translate the Bible. And he translated the Latin. The scriptures already existed in Latin. It's called the Vetus Latini, the old Latin version. But Damasus wanted a version for the common people. And the version that was produced by Jerome is called the Latin Vulgate, or the Common Latin Bible. And I think that must have been a terrible cross for Jerome, because he was a brilliant Ciceronian scholar, not a person who liked the vulgar or the common Latin. But he did translate it. Translated in Jerusalem. He went to Jerusalem after he left Rome, and he established himself in a cave that is right adjacent to the cave where Jesus is born at Bethlehem. And I've been privileged one time to celebrate Mass at the cave where Jerome lived. It's quite a thrill. And he also gathered with him several people, mostly women, who would try to become like Christ. The point, I think, is that Jerome had a long process becoming a saint. He wasn't born a saint. He had to tame his sarcastic tongue. He had to tame his intellectual pride. He had to realize that there are things more important than being just thought to be brilliant. In every way, then, he tried eventually to be what Christ wanted. He wanted to just simply empty himself and be with Christ. So I like him because he was an irascible person. He had a temper. He had sarcasm. He had all these things. But you don't get to be a saint that way. You get to be a saint by somehow tempering the rough spots that you may have and trying to do everything that the Lord wants of you. And that is Jerome, great scripture scholar even today, who translated the old Latin, the Latin Vulgate.